Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Merci d'être ici aujourd'hui à Cavalier Tool pour écouter notre annonce, un plan conservateur afin de doubler notre production d'automobiles et protéger les emplois et le secteur manufacturier ici au Canada. We're very happy to be joined by Rhonda Kirkland, Member of Parliament from the Oshawa area. We have the three Conservatives who painted Windsor blue, Chris Lewis from Windsor, Essex, Harb Gill from Windsor West, and Kathy Borelli from Windsor, Tecumseh. And we're very happy to have strong representation from the employees at Cavalier Tool and this incredible business, but also the union leadership at Unifor. We have John Breslin, Director of Unifor Skills, met Mike Piani, Financial Secretary of Unifor 1285. That's the Brampton Stellantis. We've got Jeff Gray, President of Unifor 222 at GM Oshawa. Trevor Longpre, he's the plant chairman over at the GM St. Catharines plant. And we have Emile Nabou, President of Unifor 195, Titan Tool and Die, and Mo Abouzeni. Did I get that right, Mo? I got that okay. Thanks very much, Mo, for being here from Unifor 195, Titan Tool and Die. Canada needs a strong automobile sector, not just because it puts paychecks in pockets and food on table, but because it is critical to our national security to have an industrial base. Across Canada, the Canadian Vehicle the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association says that we have 105,000 people working directly in the automobile sector, and 603,000 when you take into account both indirect and direct. Ontario alone has 700 parts makers, 400 connected autonomous and smart mobility firms, and 500 tool, die, and mold companies. Le Canada a besoin d'un secteur automobile en bonne santé. C'est un secteur économique important pour plusieurs familles canadiennes. L'industrie, ça représente 105 000 emplois directs et 600 000 emplois indirects et directs ensemble. Since the Liberal government took office, vehicle production in Canada has fallen by half. We've seen a drop from 2 million, over 2 million, to 1.2 million, down 7.8% in the last year alone under the failed leadership of Mark Carney. Our Liberal Prime Minister has promised before the election that he would protect the automobile sector. It was, like everything else, an illusion. He has since waved the white flag. He seems to have accepted that American tariffs are permanent. He also seems to think that he can carry out a permanent rupture with the United States market in favor of other markets. That, too, is an illusion. Worse, he introduced an EV rebate that provides taxpayer-funded subsidies for foreign-made electric vehicles that are in direct competition with Canadian workers. That's right, Mark Carney is forcing these workers to pay higher taxes to fund a rebate that will not go to the vehicles that they help supply with the parts that they make here. This is a subsidy for foreign producers to kill Canadian jobs. Mark Carney's failure to get the deal that he promised he would get by July 21st, 2025 with the U.S. has meant that we have paid $2 billion in tariffs on Canadian autos. Mark Carney avait promis de négocier une entente avec le président Trump avant le 21 juillet 2025. Il a brisé cette promesse, ce qui a engendré 2 milliards de dollars de tarifs payés par les Canadiens vers les États-Unis juste pour les autos. Under the Liberals, we now run a massive automotive trade deficit, buying almost twice as many cars as we make. The job losses are piling up ever since Mark Carney took office. In PACCAR, au Québec, on a vu une perte d'emploi de 475 emplois. Magna London, 49 out of work. Stellantis Brampton, 3,000 out of work. GM Cami, 1,000 out of work. Autonium London, 118 out of work. TFT Global, 245 out of work. GM Oshawa, 700 out of work. Now, Mr. Carney says that his solution to this is to have a permanent rupture with the United States auto market. That would be a dangerous illusion. The Americans buy 90% of the automobiles that Canada makes, and we buy almost all of the rest, meaning there are almost no overseas exports of Canadian automobiles today, and that cannot be changed on a dime. Even the Japanese automakers have said that they are setting up, the only reason they set up shop here in Canada is because they want to have access to the North American market. They need to use our low-cost skilled hub to serve the U.S. market, and without that access, we see economic collapse. Don't take my word for it. Recently, the Japanese ambassador emphasized in an interview that Canada's main asset as a destination for Japanese automakers is that we offer a gateway to the U.S., and the industry has said exactly the same. No one with credibility in the auto sector has come forward to agree with Mark Carney that he can replace the United States by building electric vehicles for overseas markets. There is no credible voice in the sector that lends any support to that liberal illusion. In essence, losing duty-free U.S. access would likely decimate the Japanese-led portion of Canada's auto industry, which is more than 75% of all complete vehicles made in Canada. This would lead to a sharp long-term contraction of national production and major economic fallout in Ontario. Canada's auto sector must stay alive, and it must have access to the U.S. to do so. Talk of a rupture is a dangerous illusion. We've now had a year of Mark Carney, and the reality is starting to collide with the illusion. A year of his leadership has made Canada more costly, more dangerous, and more dependent. The deficit is doubled. We have the only shrinking economy in the G7, the worst food inflation in the G7, the worst housing costs in the G7, the worst household debt in the G7, the second highest unemployment in the G7. Home building is dropping by 15%. No pipelines are approved. Ça fait maintenant un an. Hier était l'anniversaire d'un an de Mark Carney. Et on voit maintenant l'illusion est en collision avec la réalité. Le déficit a doublé. L'inflation alimentaire est le plus élevée dans le G7. On a le pire économie dans le G7. La seule économie en contraction dans le G7. Le taux de chômage le deuxième plus élevé dans le G7. La construction résidentielle est en baisse de 15%. Le seul économie où on voit une contraction dans le G7 veut dire moins d'emplois. On a vu 100 000 emplois perdus cette année, et ça c'est net. On a la pire dette des ménages dans le G7, et aucune pipeline n'a été approuvée. We need Canada to become affordable and strong at home so that we will be unbreakable abroad. That means regaining market access in the U.S. According to the Canadian government, 90% of our vehicles are sold there. And that's why our Conservative Economic Council, under the leadership of Chairman Greg McLean, co-chairs Rick Perkins and Gaetan Mallet, along with Shadow Minister Kyle Seaback and MPs Harb Gill, Kathy Borelli, Rhonda Kirkland, Chris Lewis, and others have spent months listening to automakers, unions, parts suppliers, and other industry players to forge a policy that I'm announcing today. It would be a tariff-free auto pact with the United States of America designed to double production here in Canada. The plan, it will, 1, make it more affordable to buy Canadian-made automobiles by taking the GST off of all cars made in Canada. This would give a major price advantage to Canadians to buy Canadian. At the same time, we will scrap the costly liberal EV rebates, which currently subsidize people to buy foreign-made cars. In essence, Mark Carney wants to subsidize the purchase of foreign cars with Canadian taxpayer dollars. We want to cut taxes on buying Canadian cars. We want to bring home production through performance by implementing a rule for every car produced in Canada, the same manufacturer would get to sell a car in Canada duty-free from a CUSMA partner on a dollar-for-dollar basis, similar to the 1965 Canada-US Auto Pact. Simply put, every time an automaker makes a car in Canada, they would have the right to sell a duty-free car in Canada. This would create a powerful incentive for them to relocate and repatriate production back to this country. Because right now, we buy almost twice as many cars as we make. But automakers who want to sell in our market would have to make in our market in order to do it. The same would apply for the other countries in the USMCA. We protect the North American supply chain by maintaining the minimum 75% North American content and existing CUSMA rules of origin. We would develop automotive security and technology by creating a harmonized North American cybersecurity and data standard while banning vehicles from using software connected to China and Russia. We would stand firm on unfair trade practices with our North American partners against China for maximum leverage in the CUSMA negotiations, and we will get rid of the entire EV mandate. Believe it or not, Mark Carney has announced he would do that. He still actually hasn't removed it from the books, and he's promised an emission standard that can only be met by EVs. In other words, even hybrids do not qualify for his emission standards. The effect of this would be to shut down production of internal combustion engine in our country, and it would ensure rural communities would not be able to buy vehicles that actually work for them. Conservatives will get rid of the entire EV mandate for real so that we can compete and our people can choose what kind of cars they want to buy. Le plan conservateur pour doubler la production va faciliter la fabrication et l'achat de produits canadiens en supprimant le TPS sur les voitures faites au Canada. Ramener la production au Canada avec les règles suivantes. Pour chaque voiture fabriquée au Canada, le fabricant peut vendre au Canada sans tarif une voiture qui provient d'un partenaire de notre association avec le Mexique et les États-Unis. Protéger les chaînes d'approvisionnement nord-américains en gardant le règle de 75% de contenu, harmoniser les règles nord-américaines de cybersécurité en interdisant le logiciel chinois, et s'aligner avec nos partenaires sur le tarif contre la Chine pour contrer le commerce déloyal et augmenter notre levier de négociation. For every vehicle sold in Canada and the U.S. right now that is CUSMA compliant, our countries only make 0.6 vehicles. So right now, we only make 0.6 vehicles for every one we buy in Canada. Yet Mexico makes 2.5 vehicles for every one they buy. We believe this is an imbalance, and that's why Conservatives believe a new policy approach that restores manufacturing to both Canada and the U.S. makes a duty-free agreement not only possible but beneficial to both Americans and Canadians. For Canada and the U.S. to return to a manufacturing to sales ratio of 1-for-1 would increase massively our production here and there. For Mexico, while they would drop under this plan from 2.5 to 1 to 1 to 1, without the drop, without accepting this deal, Mexico faces permanent tariffs of 25%. So they either accept this or they could end up with something much worse with their American partners. That is why I believe the other partners will accept this deal. This is similar to the old auto pack that we had before. And under that auto pack, we produced 3 million vehicles in Canada. Now we're down to 1.2. Let's get back the numbers we've lost. Shortly after we switched off of the auto pack, we lost production, and it has been declining non-stop. Notre objectif est clair. On va doubler la production d'automobiles pour atteindre 2 millions d'automobiles par année. On va redonner le travail aux usines et on va devenir plus autonome et abordable. The goal is clear. We want to double our production to 2 million vehicles. Anybody who says that's not possible, remember, that's what we were making 10 years ago. We just need to restore the production we had the day before this Liberal government took office. Let's consider the current situation. Since 1999, we've seen a decline from 3 million autos to 1.2 million. Approximately 85 to 90% or so are CUSMA compliant. Over time, if every CUSMA compliant car sold in Canada is matched by one produced here, our production would rise steadily to 1.8 million. Compounding on that, the effect of taking the GST off of Canadian-made vehicles, we would then bring our production up to 2 million. Now, the question you're asking is, why would the Americans accept this? They're obviously in a very aggressive negotiating posture. I think we can all agree on that. Well, the answer is they want to repatriate production, and this plan would bring American production up from 11 million to 13 million. In other words, they would win new and increased production as a result of this plan, which is exactly the stated policy objective of the U.S. administration. Both the United States and Canada would see a massive production gain, fulfilling our shared objectives of reindustrializing the continent. We will bring our factories roaring back to life. Our plants will be humming. Our mills will be stamping more aluminum and steel. We will make our country strong, self-reliant, and sovereign. We will be affordable and strong here at home so that we can have unbreakable leverage abroad. Nous serons un pays qui est abordable chez nous, fort chez nous, et maître chez nous. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now take questions from reporters. Please identify yourself and your outlet. One question and one follow-up.
Hi there, this is Pratyush Dayal from CBC News Windsor. How will giving Canadian-made vehicles preferential tax treatment encourage, Trump to lift his tariffs?
Well, the objective is to, what we're going to do to get the tariffs removed is put forward this plan that I've laid out, a Canadian proposed auto pack for North America. And how will we get Trump to agree? Well, the plan that we're putting forward allows both the United States and Canada to massively increase their production by incentivizing automakers to match a car made with a car sold. So that is how we're going to get the United States to agree to removing tariffs. I just came back from Detroit, where I met with the Detroit automakers. They want to see the tariffs removed, and they believe that they could increase production on their side of the border if we put an end to these tariffs. At the same time, we want to incentivize people to buy Canadian. Removing the GST gives them a 5% advantage, and we will be encouraging premiers to do the same on their share of the sales tax. So we could end up with a very large financial advantage for Canadians who go into a dealership to buy Canadian and support our Canadian production.
It's also been nearly a year since, Trump has gone ahead and imposed 232 tariffs on Canadian autos. Why are we just hearing about this plan now?
Well, we've been fighting for Canada ever since President Trump made these tariffs. And, you asked me about my plan. Where is Mark Carney's plan? He's been Prime Minister now for a year. We still have no idea what his plan is to counter these tariffs. None. First he was for counter tariffs, then he secretly removed them. First he said he would have a deal by last July, then he broke that promise. Now we don't know if he ever plans to get back to the negotiating table, what demands he's making when he gets there, and what concessions he's prepared to offer. We know nothing about his plan for automobiles other than that he seems to be waving the white flag on regaining access to the U.S. market and has some vague illusion of sending electric vehicles that we don't currently make to markets into which we don't currently sell. So I think it's time to start asking Mark Carney, what is his plan a year after he was elected on the promise that he would negotiate a win?
Grace Macaluso, Automotive News Canada. So it's the stated policy objective of the Trump administration to dismantle auto assembly in this country. How optimistic are you that whether it's a conservative government negotiating or a liberal government negotiating, that we can return to a zero tariff trade deal with the Americans?
Well, first of all, I'm not the type of person who gives up. We have to fight for every single job. We've got 600,000 jobs in our country that are dependent on this sector, and we can't just wave the white flag because the president claims that he's going to take our jobs. I would rather put forward a real plan that would repatriate production to our country, but also be highly attractive to our partners south of the border. I believe if you look at the real policy objective of the U.S. administration, it's to bring production to the U.S. That doesn't have to come from Canada. I have a plan here that will massively increase production on both sides of the border, that will be attractive to both partners, and this is the only realistic plan to save our auto sector as a result.
And you say you've met with General Motors and Ford?
That's right.
Senior executives?
Yes, that's right.
So What are they telling you in terms of, say, their commitment to maintain their manufacturing footprint in this country when they've already decreased production?
Well, they want to do business with Canada. They love Canada, and they've had a tremendous history in our country. Obviously, over the last 10 years, it's been the Liberals have created a terrible environment in which to do any kind of business. Resources, mines, manufacturing, forestry, it's all crashing under the Liberals. But I think what the automakers want is two things. They want this to be the easiest, most affordable place to deal with government and make automobiles. And secondly, they want tariff-free access to the United States. They need tariff-free access. They believe that knocking down the tariffs between Canada and the US is vital to their success and growth on both sides of the border. So that's why we're putting forward a plan that will allow them to do that.
One last question from me. Canada is releasing more than 23 million barrels of oil to deal with the current global supply.
You sure about that?
I'm just asking this question on behalf of networks.
Right.
To deal with the current global supply challenges, what more do you think the government should be doing now?
Well, I'm not convinced they're releasing any additional oil. They have no oil to release. We don't have a strategic oil stockpile in Canada. We are the only G7 country without one. So I think it's another illusion for Mark Carney to pretend that he's releasing stockpiles that he does not have. He does not have the ability to flip a switch and suddenly increase production out of the Canadian oil patch, especially after 10 years of the Liberals trying to keep that oil in the ground. Mr. Carney wrote a book where he said his values included keeping 50% of our oil in the ground. He maintains an industrial carbon tax that makes our production costs prohibitive. He's maintained all of the anti-development laws of Justin Trudeau, and he has not approved a single pipeline in a year or a single project through his major projects office. So we don't need more illusions and theater from Mr. Carney. What we need is for him to get out of the way by repealing anti-liberal laws and the industrial carbon tax, by immediately green-lighting pipelines to other markets so that we can massively increase our production. And we need to do, as I proposed a week ago, develop a strategic oil and mineral reserve so that we actually have stockpiles that we can release to the world at great profit to ourselves and at savings to our consumers. So we as Conservatives are proposing to incentivize industry to build up hundreds of millions of barrels of oil over a time period that could be kept in reserve for moments like this, and that we would give privileged access to buy that oil to countries that give us tariff-free access to their markets. This is another way for us to build leverage so that we can negotiate a win south of the border and with other partners around the world. Stronger at home gives us unbreakable leverage abroad.
Thank you for taking another question.
Sure.
There seems to be a growing consensus that Canada will have to accept some level of tariff. And I believe last year the government met with auto executives asking them essentially what level of tariff, what tariff rate can you live with? Is that something that should be part of like a plan B in case the Americans say no to zero tariffs? And do you think that's something that the industry needs to consider?
Are you talking about tariffs on autos here?
Yeah, on the automotive industry.
I don't think we should go into a negotiation making unilateral concessions. I think we should go in demanding the ideal outcome. I mean, if you enter the negotiation having already made concessions, then you're only going to have to back down even more. I mean, we've got bargaining agents here from the unions, and we've got some business people here so they've been in this room. You've got people who've been on both sides of a negotiating table many, many times, and I think they would all agree with me that you don't make concessions before you even get to the table. And that's what Mr. Carney has done. He's unilaterally conceded that there are going to be permanent tariffs on our auto, steel, and lumber, and then he says, let's start negotiating from there. How do you expect us to get a good deal doing it that way? My approach, rather, is build up as much leverage as possible on the front end by unlocking our resources, building up a strategic mineral reserve, and building our strength at home, also promising the ability to cooperate on military procurement, and then use that leverage to get tariffs removed. Here, I've got a plan that would advantage both Americans and Canadians if we get to tariff-free deal and a one-for-one production-to-sales ratio. So what we're putting forward here is a realistic plan to get the tariffs removed. Not because we expect the Americans are going to do it to be nice, but because we've got a plan that actually increases their production as well as ours. That would be a much more intelligent negotiating strategy than the unilateral concessions and the weakness we've seen from Mark Carney over the last year.
Thank you. This concludes today's press conference.
All right. Thank you.